Police in Bristol are now very concerned for the safety of Shirley Banks, who's been missing since Thursday night. Shirley, who's 28, lives in Clifton, Bristol, and she and her husband have only been married a month, and friends and family all say she was very happy. She was last seen on the evening of the 8th, shopping at Debenhams in Bristol. She didn't return, but next day it's thought she phoned Alexandra Workwear, where she's a manager, to say she was ill. We think Shirley had very little cash with her, but she was carrying an access card and a NatWest chequebook. Her orange Mini is also missing, registration number HWL 507N. Take another look at her. She's 28, 5'6", slim and blonde. If you've seen Shirley or her car, ring us now. We'll let you know if there are developments.
Murder investigations without a body are rare, but it's even more rare for someone to be charged with murder when the victim hasn't been found. In fact, Home Office records show only a handful of cases where police have successfully won a conviction without a body. But just this situation faced Avon and Somerset Police 2 years ago in one of the most unusual investigations in recent times. That investigation took 18 months and ended in April this year at Exeter Crown Court.
How do you think it's going?
Well, they've been out since 11:05 now, so it's a bit of a cliffhanger, really. You know, after 18 months, you think, I suppose when you live with a job, you think it's crystal clear, but of course the jury are picking it up fresh, so there's a lot to consider. But I'm getting a little bit concerned, I suppose.
It's October 1987, 18 months before that trial took place. In Bristol's city centre, something happened which in the months that followed was to prove of vital significance. On the dockside in the watershed area, Julia Holman was leaving a wine bar after farewell celebrations for a friend from work. She cut through Cannan's Road to where her car was parked in the Cannan's Marsh car park.
Do as I say and you won't get hurt.
Piss off! Ah!
Her courage and quick thinking may have saved her life. The man strolled coolly away. The next morning, in another part of the city, at number 12 High Street, Shirley Banks was leaving as usual for the clothing company where she worked as a sales manageress.
Oh, sorry, that's all right.
The door of her orange Mini Clubman was jammed on the driver's side. That Thursday evening, it was late-night shopping at Broadmead Shopping Centre. Shirley bought a blue and white patterned dress at Topshop in Debenhams.
Lovely. So much. Thank you. Bye.
As she was leaving, she met two friends from work.
Bye then. Bye.
She and her husband Richard had arranged to meet for a drink that night.
Shirley?
Evening. Has Shirley been in tonight?
No, sorry.
Oh, thanks.
Bye.
Back home, Richard waited up for her, but Shirley didn't return. Next day, as soon as he got into his office, Richard phoned Shirley's work and received some worrying news.
No, she phoned just before 9, said she'd been up all night with her tummy upset and wouldn't be in today. Thought she'd be with you, Richard.
No.
Thanks, anyway.
I first became involved in the inquiry on the Monday following Shirley's disappearance and worked on it from that day onwards. It was quite clear that there was something very unusual in the circumstances surrounding her disappearance, and the inquiry got off to a fast rate of knots right from the outset.
Hello, my name's DC Tutton. I'm from the Central Police Station.
Obviously we were aware of the incident at Cannon's Marsh. We had a man who was trying to abduct a woman returning to her car, and we knew that Shirley, having gone shopping, had parked her car in a car park somewhere in the area of Broadmead. We could never establish exactly where. So it was an option that we took very seriously. We were looking at all the usual places for dumping vehicles. All the car parks throughout the city and surrounding force areas were being checked.
Whilst I was on holiday, I'd seen in a national newspaper, an English newspaper abroad, a very brief reference to the missing girl, Shirley Banks. My immediate reaction was this was on my patch, and if it was in the national newspapers, then potentially it was quite a big job.
Well, lots of people did all sorts of things to help us, but I suppose the biggest thing which they did was just support us with their love, because that was all they could do.
Sitting back, doing nothing, waiting for something to happen was very difficult. Even though what we were doing, getting leaflets produced with the car registration number, delivering them to taxi ranks and big stores and so on, even though that was a fairly futile gesture, really, and we were far less well equipped to deal with that than the police, obviously, it gave us something to do.
We set about organising press conferences, one that was attended by Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds, another was attended by Richard Banks. We made several broadcasts on local TV and local radio.
Police say they're now increasingly concerned about the disappearance of a Bristol woman.
We were able to publicise the case via the crime desk of the Crimewatch programme as early as the Tuesday following Shirley's disappearance.
Police in Bristol are now very concerned for the safety of Shirley Banks, who's been missing since Thursday night. Shirley, who's 28, lives in Clifton, Bristol, and she and her husband have only been married a month. Her orange Mini is also missing, registration number HWL.
Certain areas of the docks were being searched for the vehicle. During the course of those first weeks, our hopes were high on occasions when a particular vehicle was sighted, only to be dashed when the inquiry was completed.
Certainly the phone call at 9 o'clock to her employer's premises indicated that she may well have been voluntarily absent at that time, but this was quickly dispelled by the facts.
Police experience shows that on occasions, in fact not on occasions, quite often, that the husband is linked to the disappearance of the wife.
We were always very mindful of the intense pressure that Richard was under at that time. However, he realised that we were making certain inquiries into his background and checking on his movements, and he found it difficult to come to terms with that, and as a result he reacted against that.
We really needed to put a lot of effort into eliminating Richard at an early stage, and that we did. We had made the conscious decision that the first time that we would publicly link the Cannon's Marsh attempt abduction with Shirley Banks' disappearance would be when we put out the Crimewatch reconstruction. Now that was scheduled to be filmed in early November, and in due course would have been put out towards the end of November. That would have given us time to cover various options in relation to suspects that we thought were in the Bristol area who we really wanted to check out, and we didn't want those people to have the benefit of knowing that we in fact were linking the two incidents. As it turned out, in fact, we were overtaken by events.
This is Leamington Spa. It was a quiet afternoon at Ginger, a dress shop in Regent Street.
Well,
Jane, could you get Dennis on the phone for me, please? I owe him some money. If he wants to come into the shop, I'll give it to him.
Put the phone down. Turn out the lights and lock the door. Where are you going?
help! Help! This is
passers-by, Bob Filer, a businessman, and Andy Riley, a builder, gave chase. They lost him in a series of back streets behind St. Peter's Church.
What's happened?
Oh, you got a car phone. Can you find the police, please? Chasing a guy who's attacked a couple of women up the road there.
Hello?
Hey, there he goes.
I'm on the corner of Bedford Street.
He was disappearing into the church grounds.
Something's happened here where a man's attacked 2 women.
They passed one man, but he had no jacket and wasn't carrying a bag, so Andy Riley thought it couldn't have been the one he'd been chasing. They saw no one else and went back to the church.
Is that the one?
Yeah, that's it.
It is.
Perhaps the man they'd seen earlier was the one they were looking for.
Good Lord. Is that the knife, Mr. Riley?
Yeah, that's it.
OK, I don't think we'll touch him any further. Just drop him back in the bag. I'll take the bag.
And drops of blood on the bag suggested he may have cut himself in the chase.
There he is!
Excuse me, I'll have a few words with you. Would you mind turning around the side of the building?
Can I see your right hand, please? Look, what have I done? I only came here shopping. Look, just let us look at the hand.
You take everything out of your pockets. That's it.
One of his keys was traced to a black BMW parked near the dress shop. In a nearby garage, a trail of blood led them to the toilets, where they found some rope hidden in a cistern. The man they'd arrested was a 33-year-old businessman, John Cannan. He had a criminal record from the age of 14 for robbery, theft and sexual offences. He'd been given an 8-year prison sentence for robbery and a rape in a dress shop in 1981, but he'd been released from Wormwood Scrubs in July 1986.
I felt it was essential that all the clothing from Cannan was recovered, and he was put in what we call a zoot suit, which is really a forensic bag with a zip in, so that once he's been examined by a doctor, any hairs or other fibres stuck to his body can be examined by the forensic scientist.
In the BMW, police found more rope and an imitation handgun. The next day, the car was given a full forensic examination.
I had a telephone call during the afternoon from Derek French, who told me about Cannan and his arrest. Searching a briefcase that they'd found in Cannan's possession, they'd found the excise licence from Shirley Banks' vehicle. That telephone call will always stay with me, because it was the first real break that we'd had in 3 weeks of hard slog.
Well, in fact, I'd gone to look at another inquiry. I rang in to the officer in the mini-incident room. Alex, is Mr. Saunders here? Any developments up there?
Yeah, we've been trying to get hold of you, sir. You're not going to believe this, but we found Shirley Banks' Mini in a lock-up garage up in an address at Foy House in Lee Wood, just over the suspension bridge.
Right, I'll go up there straight away. If anybody wants me, that's where I'll be. I'll see you later, mate. Bye.
Foy House was a block of flats where John Cannan lived.
When I arrived at Foy House, looking out of a window and calling out to me, there was a reporter from The Sun.
Ian?
The first thing that came into my mind that we had found the Mini. Where was Shirley? And there were some woods at the back. perhaps she was lying in those woods and the first person to discover her was going to be a reporter. As it was, we quickly cordoned off the area, and my worst fears weren't realised, but it was a bit of a worrying moment, I can tell you.
It's a respray job, isn't it, Bob?
Yeah, I think it's been cleaned by hand. There's brush marks on it.
Horrible job. Excuse me, is there anything in the car?
It was discovered with a different colour, royal blue. It had different registration plates, but police are satisfied that it is Shirley Banks's car. A police lorry arrived to take it away for forensic tests. Police have contacted Shirley Banks's husband.
Clearly, the finding of the car suggested to us that some ill had befallen Shirley, and this really confirmed it.
Meanwhile, Cannan was still being questioned by Warwickshire police on the incident in Leamington Spa.
Cannan was in what I call superintendent's custody time. That meant that very shortly he had to be charged or taken before a magistrate. We didn't want the situation that Cannan was in fact detained in Leamington when the main thrust of the inquiry was almost bound to be in Bristol.
The Police and Criminal Evidence Act was brought in to ensure that the rights of the prisoner are looked after.
I'll finish the interview with Cannan. Can you put him back in number 1, please?
In total, we have 36 hours to keep a person within custody.
Yes, mate. Mr. Cannan, follow me, please.
Where someone's been arrested for a particular offence, you cannot interview that person for another offence without starting what we call the clock.
So the clock would be restarted as soon as Bristol police began questioning Cannan about Shirley Banks.
Time was not on our side. Indeed, the pressure was on us. We had to act quickly. I decided that Brian Saunders and Terry Jones should be the officers to interrogate him. And in fact, I sent them up to Leamington to liaise with the Warwickshire police and bring him back to Filton police station.
We made the decision that he would be bailed from our police station at Warwick and immediately rearrested.
Hello, John. D.I. Jones, this is DCI Saunders. We're from Bristol. I'm now arresting you for the abduction of Shirley Ann Banks. He talked continuously and wanted to tell us all about his family background. He talked rather nervously, I thought, but again came across as someone who was very much in control, very confident, obviously a very intelligent man and very articulate.
12 miles outside Bristol, they started the clock again.
John, I want to remind you, you're not obliged to say anything unless you wish to do so. But what
From this moment, Bristol police had 36 hours to question him.
Can you help me with the whereabouts of Shirley Banks? Is she alive or is she dead?
No, I can't. And I don't wish to discuss the matter until I see my solicitor.
The situation facing us was really the reversal of the usual murder inquiry. We had the man, the suspect, we didn't have a body. And that really put pressure on us, I think.
Without a body, they couldn't be absolutely sure that a murder had been committed at all, and what evidence they had at that stage was merely circumstantial.
Every night, certainly Brian Saunders would meet with me and we would have a briefing on how the interview had gone thus far, and indeed what we were going to take to the briefing the next day.
Every morning, the 50 officers working on the case would assemble to hear Cannan's latest statements and discuss the next moves.
Well, this morning I've got 6 task force teams searching various locations in Lee Woods, and as a result of some interesting information that came in yesterday evening, the Force Underwater Search Unit this morning will be carrying out a dive at Abbott's Pool.
Commence your search, over.
In addition to that, sir, I've contacted the Royal Air Force, and they will be helping us with aerial photography in infrared mode for Lee Woods.
Over several days, scenes of crime men made a systematic forensic search of Cannan's flat at Foy House. And a fully computerised incident room was set up at the police training school at King's Weston House in Bristol. The case had quickly become front-page news, and information began pouring in. But the newspapers were doing their own investigations. That weekend, several papers ran stories speculating on a possible link between Cannan and the case of Susie Lamplugh, the estate agent who disappeared in West London in July 1986.
Released from West London's Wormwood Scrubs just before Susie Lamplugh disappeared last July. The jail is not far from where Miss Lamplugh lived.
We had officers down from the inquiry. They had access to all our material, and they had the responsibility of seeing if there was a link between my inquiry and their inquiry. As the situation stands, there is no evidence to suggest a link.
What I will say about the Susie Lamplugh inquiry is that we looked at it very, very closely. We worked closely with the Met, because rest assured, if there had been a scrap of evidence, in the same way that we pursued other matters, we would have pursued that. There was no evidence, and there the matter must lie.
And that same weekend, as Cannan's solicitor pointed out to him, one newspaper had published his previous record, a potential contempt of court.
Viewed from the interview room, I was a little bit annoyed about their activities, because in that confined situation there with Cannan, it really created problems for me. But the vast majority of the evidence came in because of the publicity. You need the publicity, you need the public to feed you with the inquiries, really, and that's what cracked the case.
John, I just want to go on.
Can I just interject here, if I may? I think we are all aware that there is a reduction in the likelihood of my having a fair trial, owing to the events of the past couple of days.
I wouldn't allow him to have the newspapers. He kept demanding them, and at one stage said he wouldn't talk anymore unless he had the newspapers. Now, my reason for not allowing him the newspapers was because I didn't want him to be influenced by those stories. But I did agree to allow him to have the newspapers, and I cut the pieces out that referred to his case.
And right again.
Time was running out, but how could Cannan possibly explain the most damning evidence of all? Shirley's Mini in his garage.
The Mini was bought from an auction outside the ring. I struck up a conversation with somebody who told me that he had a car for sale that seemed ideally priced and was cheap, very cheap. He did not bring the car round that night. He brought it round the following night. The guy's name was Philip Hodgson or Philip Hodgkinson, I don't know which. I'm not a regular on the Bristol motor circuit. The car was put in my garage, and it all went on from there. Then I read about this girl, Shirley Banks. Now, you are a policeman. You tell me how I can go to the police station and say to the police, I have got this car, when I have got a criminal record for rape. You tell me how I can do that.
We didn't trace anything to support his story, and having told me about the motor auction, he then, in fact, asked a young police officer where the motor auction was. So I think we're quite convinced he never ever went there.
The 36 hours were up, so now a charge had to be brought. That Sunday, the 1st of November, at exactly 12:30, he was charged with theft and then later with the more serious offence of assault with intent to rob at Leamington Spa. As a result, the next day, the magistrate granted them 3 more days to question him.
Bail, and Cannan will be held in police custody in Bristol until Friday.
Now, the line of questioning concentrated on Thursday, the 8th of October. What was Cannan doing on the day Shirley Banks disappeared?
Should I say this? I'll say it. Now, there's a shop, and I've always equated that with, like, curtains. I remember going to the shop, actually, and there's this young blonde lady there, attractive blonde lady, here we go, and she said, can I help you? I said, I'm sorry, I've got the wrong shop. She said, why? I said, you don't sell curtains. She said, no, we're just, you know, ladies' clothes. Most embarrassed, I go out. And I know what you're thinking, forget it.
Over many days he accounted for his movements on the 8th of October 1987. And the sum total of it was, he did not have an alibi. He really settled down to tell us at the end of the day that he in fact went to a wine shop. I don't believe he went to a wine shop that night. I think he was using a technique that he used throughout the interviews of giving us true facts about a visit to a certain place, but talking about a different day. He didn't have an alibi for when Shirley went missing.
But for the next day, Friday the 9th of October, there was much more information to go on. Several important witnesses came forward.
Our case was that Shirley was no doubt kept captive in the flat.
Cannan had been a regular customer at a local plant shop. The owner had tried to call him that Friday morning.
He'd invited us round for a meal on Saturday, October the 10th. I tried to phone him during the week before to say that we couldn't come, didn't get through. And then on the Friday morning I got through straight away.
Hello? Hello, John? It's Christine from Rainbow Pottery. The plant shop in Clifton.
Ah, hello.
I'm sorry, have I just woken you up?
No, it just takes a little while for my brain to get going in the morning.
I'm sorry I've left it so late. I tried to call you last night.
I was quite sort of aghast that he didn't actually remember who I was and that it didn't seem to matter anyway.
No problem. I'll call you again sometime.
At lunchtime, Cannan went out to cash a cheque. Could he have left Shirley alone in his flat? About that time, this taxi driver received a call to pick up a woman from flat number 2 at Foy House.
Taxi for Temple Meads?
No, not here. Lady ordered a taxi? No, nobody's ordered a taxi.
Are you sure on that?
I'm absolutely positive.
Okay.
A neighbour remembered Cannan paid her a visit just after lunchtime.
Oh, hello, John.
Hello, Val. I was wondering if I could borrow your Hoover. Mine seems to have packed up.
Yeah, sure. Hold on a sec. Okay, here you go.
Thanks very much. I'll bring it back later.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
And soon after that, this witness saw him cleaning his car.
Hello. What was emerging was that there was a period in the afternoon from about 2:30, 3 o'clock until about 7:30 at night, when in fact we couldn't account for his movements. And we quickly realised that that was the period of time when he must have taken Shirley out of the flat and taken her away somewhere.
Detectives had also traced a video shot by a dating agency that Cannan had joined.
Yes, I have a dislike of inflated egos. People who are, they look at me, I'm great type. I don't like that.
Right.
I can't handle that sort of inner weakness.
The kind of pretentious.
Yeah, I don't like that at all. I just like just normal, average people.
Right.
Inquiries revealed that he'd had 2 long-term relationships in the past.
There was one back in 1980 that ended when the girl in fact told him she didn't want to see him anymore, and in effect that ended up by him being violent towards her. Cannan went on in early 81 to commit this horrific rape in a shop. We then looked at his activities in 1987, and he was clearly deeply involved with a lady in Bristol. That relationship came to an end as far as she was concerned, and I don't think he could accept that.
It really got up my nose that just because she comes from a very privileged background, it really offends me. You want to talk about character? Well, I have some principles. You may not believe so, but I have some. And one of those principles is this, that if you are caught doing something, put your hand up, be honest and admit it. That's fair enough. If you're a crook and a villain and you've done it, fair enough. But I have this hatred, this dislike of people who purport to be respectable, decent and honest, abiding by professional standards, people of privilege who will put on airs and graces and this facade of respectability.
The police now had 1 day left of their 3-day remand. They decided to hold an identification parade for the woman who'd been attacked in her car the evening before Shirley went missing.
When I was asked to come to the identification parade, I felt it was going to be a complete waste of time.
I was so sure the man who'd attacked me wouldn't be there.
Come on in, Miss Holman.
As I entered the room, my attention was immediately drawn to the line of men behind the screens.
You've been asked down here today to see if you can pick out the person who you saw.
I saw him straight away. I had no doubt that it was him, but I did listen to what the inspector had to say, and I did look at all the men. I was worried that the men on the lineup might be able to see me, although the police had told me they'd be behind one-way glass. I was still sure that the man at number 3 was my attacker. Number 3.
Could you just repeat that so that the solicitor can hear?
Number 3.
Okay, thanks very much, Miss Holman.
I was in conference with the Crown Prosecution Service, Mr. Drew, at that time. We were discussing our next remand hearing, and indeed, putting it bluntly, we had problems. At that stage, during the conference, the telephone went, and in fact, they told us that Julia Holman had in fact picked Cannan out. I think we were somewhat ecstatic.
So now, with more charges against him, they'd gained another 3 days. Time that was vital not only to continue questioning Cannan, but also to give them the chance to follow up several crucial lines of inquiry.
We'd found a cleaning ticket. Officers went to Sutton Coldfield and spoke to the young lady in the cleaners. She told them that the Mac had been handed in by Cannan late in October of 1987 and was covered in red mud.
You mentioned red marks, earth marks, on a raincoat, on my raincoat.
Yeah, if we can just recap, I think you said that the raincoat was in the boot of your car, and you'd put a lawnmower on top of the raincoat.
Which is true. I'm not changing anything. What I'm saying, I'm trying to enlarge, not change. No, everything I've said is right. It would be perhaps useful if one were to make inquiries with a certain lady of our acquaintance in Bristol, not so very far away from here, to confirm that a few weeks ago, several weeks ago, we did in fact make love on that raincoat in Ashton Park.
Right, okay.
Where the earth is red.
Well, John, thank you for that.
When I had a look at it, I found that the cuffs, the lapels, had very faint washed out blood stains, and there were 1 or 2 other spots of blood here and there on the raincoat. In particular, bloodstains between the shoulder blades gave a blood group which was of the same group as Mr. Cannan himself, so it could be his blood. But from our deductions of the blood groups of Shirley Banks's father and sister, Shirley herself could have been of that blood group as well. So we couldn't exclude the blood as being Shirley Banks's.
A top shop bag was found in the BMW motor car. As luck would have it, when Shirley was shopping for the dress, the girl ran out of the normal size bags, and so she had to use a bag of a size not normally used to put dresses in. Lo and behold, when we looked at the bag, it was the sort that Shirley would have been given. We reached a point on the 10th of November when it became apparent we weren't going to get any more from questioning at that stage. We knew that the forensic evidence would take some time to come through, and indeed we hadn't found Shirley's body, but we thought we had enough to charge him with kidnap. We didn't charge him with murder at that stage because that would prevent us from questioning him should the body turn up, or indeed should forensic evidence come to light.
We ended up at a stage towards the end of November whereby there were 4 unidentified keys. We thought it is vital that we find out where these related, and indeed we thought that perhaps Cannan may have another address somewhere, indeed where there may be evidence. Now, we needed to publish his photograph, and as you can well appreciate, the publication of a photograph of a man in custody, certainly in a case of this magnitude, is quite a radical step.
John, we've got a bit of a problem.
It was necessary, therefore, to get legal advice on the implications.
Well, there are, I suppose, 2 principal dangers. The first one was that if we used Cannan's photograph in the press, any identification evidence which came after that would be probably tainted by the fact that the photograph had been published, and therefore any identification parade would probably lose their cogency. And more paramount than that, I think, was the need to secure a fair trial, so far as Cannan was concerned. We came to the conclusion that there was no alternative.
There was a possibility that Shirley had been kept captive somewhere with enough food or what have you, and was still alive. So we really had to take that one last chance and go to the public and say, have you seen this man?
The police say the gravity of their inquiries makes it vital the man is identified. They want to hear from anyone who has done business with him in the past 18 months, especially in relation to renting or letting property.
The renewed publicity generated several new leads. An elderly lady came forward. She'd been held up in traffic on Bridge Road just past Cannan's flat that Friday afternoon after Shirley's disappearance.
There was a man in the foliage on the edge of the wood dragging something. I heard loud punching noises, and then the sunlight fell across the back of a man, and he was punching at something. He seemed to be holding something at arm's length. I heard a woman's voice say, "Oh no, no," but very pleadingly. Dreadful. He kept saying, "I warned you what I would do, I warned you." And then suddenly there was a terrible choking sound, and everything went quiet. And the man was looking at me. The next thing I knew, I could hear footsteps pounding up towards the pathway, and there he was. As we slowly went off, he was watching me, but from under his left arm, so that his head was upside down.
She was a well-intentioned lady, there's no doubt about that. But in Crown Court terms, a witness who doesn't come forward until a number of weeks later and then makes statements which in effect increase the amount that she saw really had to be looked at with a fine-tooth comb, and we did that. I found that it was possible to hear noises in the location she had been. She clearly had seen something in those woods.
But then came the breakthrough.
Our day-to-day work is very straightforward, in as much as we can go to the system, take out the prints of a known offender and compare them with marks from scenes of crime. But with Shirley's print, we had to start from scratch. So the scenes of crime men went to various locations where Shirley was known to have been, her home, her workplace and her parents' home, and they took impressions from various articles in those locations. We compared all those impressions, and we eventually built up a composite set of what we believed was Shirley Banks's fingerprints. We checked all those marks against marks on documents and other articles from the flats in Foy House. And eventually we found a mark that was common to the various locations where Shirley had been and Foy House, and that was the left thumb on the document.
All those weeks of painstaking detection had finally paid off. Having checked every inch of John Cannan's flat, they'd found one single thumbprint among a pile of papers in an old wooden chest.
Here we had a man who'd been telling me for 10 days, even more, he'd never ever seen Shirley Banks. And we had a fingerprint in the flat saying she'd been there. It was tremendous.
The finding of the fingerprint meant that we could certainly charge him with murder. It was the timing of when we brought him out was the question there afterwards.
They brought him out of the cells in late December. Their first move was to take Cannan to the street where Shirley lived.
Have you ever been in this road before?
No, I don't think so.
We anticipated that when confronted with the fingerprint, he would come up with a story saying that he had an association with her, albeit just a fleeting meeting.
Have you ever been to that address, 12 High Street?
No, I haven't. Certainly not.
Remember the photograph of Shirley Banks that I showed you?
Yes, I remember her picture and the posters.
Did you ever meet Shirley, the girl in the photograph, in this road?
No.
Did you ever bump into her in the street?
No.
Did you ever meet her anywhere in Bristol?
No, categorically, no.
Now he would find it very difficult to explain that thumbprint in his flat.
Brian, what do you think of policemen who plant evidence or break the rules?
John, you know we wouldn't do that.
Prior to the final interview, we purposely showed Cannan a copy of the note that in fact Shirley's thumbprint had been found on. We showed him that photocopy, not telling him that there was a fingerprint on the original. He then told us over a period of half an hour that that document had never ever left his flat. John, you'll appreciate that when you were arrested, police officers searched your flat thoroughly. And this is the original note that was removed from the monk's chest.
I accept.
All right. Here's a photograph of Shirley. Unfortunately, she can't be here, can she?
No.
So she's done the next best thing, John. She's left her thumbprint on this document, a document taken from your home, a document that didn't arrive there till the 28th of September. That's her thumbprint. Now tell me, John, we're in this room with all these implements, and now we've got a piece of paper with Shirley's thumbprint on it. Now, I'm not an expert, but they tell me that's an exceptionally good thumbprint.
Problem.
You've got a problem, John.
No, you do.
Don't tell me I've got a problem. You've got a problem. Don't smoke screen. Because this fingerprint is the one thing that you can't give one of your silly stories about. The most corrupt police officer in the world couldn't plant that, could he?
Look, you must think what you must.
Well, even if you're charged and you think about what I've said to you today, you think about the thumbprint, it's still open to you to come back at any time and tell us where Shirley's body is. Now, evidence isn't a matter for me. It's a matter for a court. But I'll just ask you as one man to another, please tell us where she is. I don't think I got anything else to say to you. The time is 11:47, and we're going to turn off tape 38.
You are charged for that you, between the 7th day of October 1987 and the 30th day of October 1987, in the city of Bristol or elsewhere, did murder Shirley Ann Banks. That's contrary to common law.
Police now faced the prospect of bringing to court a murder case without ever having found the victim's body.
I take it that's no reply?
Yes.
But then the most significant discovery of the case was made by a member of the public. On Easter Sunday, 3 months after Cannan had been charged, a woman gathering moss discovered Shirley's body in a ditch on the Quantock Hills near Bridgewater. She'd been beaten about the head. By tracing tufts of hair, 50 task force officers were able to work their way to a point 150 feet upstream where they believed her body had been left. In the dark red mud, they found some jewellery. Over a period of 6 days, they stripped the whole area.
At the scene, or close to where the body was found, 3 dark bluish-green buttons were recovered, which still had attached to them the stitching thread that had originally attached them to the garment they came from. Now, it was known that Shirley Banks, on the night she went missing, had been to Debenhams in Bristol and had bought a dress. And the question was, were these buttons from that dress? So the police obtained a dress believed to be identical to the one bought and sent that to me, and I then compared the buttons found at the scene with the buttons still on this dress. And in all analytical tests we could carry out, they were exactly the same. It's almost certain, in my view, that those buttons came from Shirley Banks's dress, and you can deduce a number of things. It means that the buttons were ripped off her dress at the scene, and it means also that she put the dress on after buying it.
But police still wanted more to clinch their case against John Cannan. And the further they looked into his past, the more they discovered. They questioned him about some robberies in the West Midlands.
During the inquiry, we became aware that Cannan was in possession on occasions of considerable sums of money. We looked at his occupation as a car dealer, and it didn't hold water as far as I was concerned.
A financial profile was compiled by Sergeant Mike Lloyd.
Financial profiling is, of course, commonplace now in drugs investigations. I believe this was the first occasion that's ever been undertaken in connection with a murder inquiry. The information revealed the use of the bank account held by John Cannan, the use of the cash point card held by him, and also his movements within the United Kingdom. One of the areas of investigation concerned the report of a rape in Reading in October 1986. John Cannan had previously been arrested in respect of this offence and produced an alibi which stated that he was at home at Sutton Coldfield on the 6th and 7th of October. As a result of the financial inquiries, we were able to prove that on the 6th of October, at around 1:30, he used his cash point card at a bank at Clifton. At around 9, he used his cash point card again, but this time in London. And the following day, the 7th of October, used his cash point card again back in Bristol, which suggested he was a long way away from Sutton Coldfield.
And on the intercity line between London and Bristol is Reading. The rape case had centred on the identity of a man seen carrying a plastic bag. In fact, Thames Valley Police had arrested Cannan, but there hadn't been enough evidence to charge him.
He was placed on an identification parade and no positive identification was made. And the forensic samples that we had certainly didn't support us sufficiently to lay a charge against him.
Even an early attempt at DNA genetic profiling failed to get a result. Then, in June 1988, when Avon and Somerset Police asked for the exhibits, forensic scientist John Bark decided he'd do one more test himself. Nearly 2 years on, the technology had greatly improved.
The result of this test is that I found at least 10 DNA bands. The significance of 10 DNA bands is that you would not expect to find this profile in more than 1 in 700,000 of the population. I also ran a blood sample from John Cannan alongside the staining and found that the profile matched in every band.
This was in itself convincing evidence. But to be absolutely sure, the Home Office approached the ICI laboratories, who at that time had even more sophisticated DNA equipment.
The Aldermaston Laboratory brought to us a nylon membrane on which was the DNA pattern from Mr. Cannan and the DNA pattern from semen found on the underwear of the victim. We compared the DNA profile from Cannan and that of the semen in the underpants. You can see that each band in the profile matches between the semen stain and that DNA profile of John Cannan. We found that this match would only occur about once in 260 million individuals.
In my experience, that is the highest I've heard of. I accept there may well be higher ones that I don't know about. But again, it was vital. It proved the Reading rape.
The efforts of 5 police forces, 150 officers working 140,000 man-hours over 18 months, culminated in the trial, which began at Exeter Crown Court in April this year. After 3 weeks of hearing the evidence, the jury retired to consider their verdict.
Well, it's a real marathon one. They've adjourned now until tomorrow, 7:15 at night. It's the longest one I've been on, but there we are. It was a long inquiry.
The next day, the waiting continued.
Well, it's not all over, but it's 90% over now. There's a conviction on the murder and the abduction, which is, we're home, I think.
It took the jury 10 hours, but in the end, there was no doubt in their minds. They decided unanimously that the former ex-car salesman John Cannan was guilty. His eyes on the judge in front of him. Shirley.
Absolute relief at the end that they'd actually come to that verdict, simply because we felt that that was the right verdict, and we couldn't have coped, I don't think, very easily with the thought that maybe it could have happened to somebody else. I think because the police have kept us in touch so much that, and we've met so many officers involved, that we've realised the importance of how big a team it was for a start.
Yes. Mm.
And it was for them and obviously for us and for the public as well, you know, to get the right verdict.
We've been very anxious to try to avoid allowing the sort of negative emotions, hatred, anger, revenge and so on, intrude on the rest of our life and so on. We've tried to avoid that, and perhaps it's because of that we have, or that I have, this more detached view of John Cannan.
Maybe our feelings haven't come out yet.
that case, who's Bob Crampton.
Horfield Prison in Bristol tonight. In the highest security wing, John Cannan, the man who killed Shirley Banks, is beginning a life sentence. For once, it'll mean just that. The judge told him at the age of 35 that he'd never come out of prison again. He's simply too dangerous. Cannan is responsible for a series of ruthless sex attacks, but he'll always be remembered as the man who committed the murder of Shirley Banks. The judge said Cannan is violent, horrible, evil. Tonight, we look back on that evil past, on the rapist who was freed from prison to strike again. We've been told that he's a classic serial rapist. If he hadn't been caught, he would have gone on to commit further awful crimes.
But there's another side to John Cannan, a charming man with dashing good looks who liked to think he was a man about town, able to boast to the police about a string of affairs. Just 6 weeks before his arrest, John Cannan made this video for a dating agency in Bristol. It was a controlled, confident performance.
I think a ruff would suit me. Tights and a sword. I can see me on some bridge or some galleon, bigger pirate. Yes, I can handle that.
In all, the judge handed down 3 life sentences and another 38 years in prison terms. John Cannan, rapist, kidnapper and murderer. We'll be returning to that interview later in the programme and talking to the other key figure in this case, Richard Banks.
As far as John Cannan is concerned, you know, I have no thoughts really at all.
Is this a significant day in your life? Does it mean that you can start again?
I think it's probably less significant for me than it is for everybody else, really, because it's just sort of confirming publicly what everybody involved with the whole sort of horror of it has known for getting on for 2 years.
For Richard Banks, the ordeal is finally over after 18 months. But as Cannan starts his life sentence, there are still questions to be answered. How could a woman like Shirley Banks have been kidnapped in a busy shopping centre like Broadmead? Were the police too slow to launch their biggest ever inquiry? And has Cannan got away with murder? The murder of Susie Lamplugh, the London estate agent whose body has never been found. Compare this picture of Cannan with this artist's impression of the mysterious Mr. Kipper, the man the police want to trace in connection with the disappearance of Miss Lamplugh. But first, the tragedy of Shirley Banks, the young woman who went out shopping and never returned.
Shirley Ann Reynolds was born in Scotland. She was the eldest of 3 sisters in a close-knit family. They moved to Somerset, where Shirley was educated. After school, she took a business course at Bristol Polytechnic. Her last job was at Alexandra Workwear in Patchway, where she'd been for several years. She met Richard through her sister Gillian, and they lived together in Bristol for 5 years before they got married. That day was 6 weeks before she disappeared.
She was a lovely girl. She was very friendly, very home-loving, very hard-working. Had a very settled sort of life, especially at the time that things went wrong.
And how were her and Richard together?
They'd been together for a very long time. It's something that people seem to forget. They'd been living together for 5 years before they got married. And like any couple, they'd had ups and downs during that time. But at the time things went wrong, she was at the happiest I'd ever seen her, which makes things doubly sad, really.
When Shirley Banks set out for work on Thursday, October the 8th, 1987, she told her husband that she'd be going to Broadmead that evening, late-night shopping, to buy herself a new dress. He never saw her alive again.
The only person who knows exactly what happened here in Broadmead that night is John Cannan. The shops were as busy as any Thursday evening. 2 friends with pay packets from Alexandra Workwear were ready to spend money on new clothes. They met Shirley Banks in Debenhams and even talked to her about a blue and white spotted dress she had her eye on. But even now the police can only guess as to what happened then and why no one spotted Cannan lying in wait.
Back at their Clifton home, Richard Banks was beginning to wonder what had happened to her. But it was 24 hours before he went to the police. By then, she was dead.
I did exactly what anybody in the same situation would have done. I foolishly, from the start off, was of the same school of thought that they were, that things like this don't happen, and went through every possible eventuality in my own mind and contacted every single person, and obviously one hopes that at any moment in time something, the good news or the explanation will arrive, but unfortunately it didn't.
Banks wasn't to know it at first, and the police didn't make the connection. But the previous night, a mile away from Broadmead, a gunman had tried to abduct office worker Julia Holman as she returned to her car parked at Cannon's Marsh. She got away, but if she hadn't fought off that man, would she have been murdered too? It's now clear that Shirley Banks was murdered because she simply happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, when John Cannan was on the rebound from his broken affair with Annabel Rose. By chance, he stumbled across Shirley Banks, but it could have been any young woman. John Cannan was the second of 3 children brought up in Sutton Coldfield on the northern outskirts of Birmingham. After he left school with 5 CSEs and 3 O-levels, he first went into the Merchant Navy. It didn't last. He held a string of jobs as a car salesman. He'd been engaged to his girlfriend June for 7 years when they married in 1978. Cannan had met her because she worked as a florist near his father's garage. But even after the wedding, they lived at the family home.
It was here, not far from the family home, that Cannan committed the crime that led to his first prison sentence. It was a rape that brought horror headlines. It was described as disgusting and diabolical. In March 1981, Cannan walked into a boutique in the opulent Four Oaks area, produced a knife and demanded money. He was then to rape the woman's shop assistant in front of a 17-month-old son and her mother, who was forced to watch while bound hand and foot. At Birmingham Crown Court, Cannan was jailed for 5 years for the rape and given another 3 years for other offences: robbery, the taking away of a car, and stealing £5 from the boutique.
Cannan had been caught because someone recognised his distinctive features captured on this photo-fit picture. 5 years later, in 1986, he came out of Wormwood Scrubs to resume his career as a car salesman and as a rapist. Just 3 months after leaving prison, he kidnapped and raped a housewife in Reading. By then, Cannan had moved to Bristol. He'd bought himself a black BMW. He worked hard to cultivate his image, explaining that his money had come from the sale of businesses in the Midlands. Not everyone was impressed.
He was very smooth talking, very friendly, probably too smooth. He came on very heavily towards women, especially the attractive ones.
So he was a playboy, was he?
Yes, definitely, I would say so.
Later, Cannan went back to his job as a car salesman, this time at Holder's garage in Congresbury. He apparently charmed a string of women with his tall stories, until 3 weeks before Shirley Banks went missing. He decided to register with a dating agency, which used to have offices in Park Street. He signed on under the pseudonym John Peterson, describing himself as a born romantic.
He was actually very nice. I thought he was attractive, well presented. He had a smart suit on, and he came across as a very confident and probably fairly aggressive person. But I did actually quite like him.
Yes, I have a dislike of inflated egos. People who are, they look at me, I'm great type. I don't like that. I can't handle that sort of inner weakness.
They're kind of pretentious.
Yeah, I don't like that at all. I just like just normal, average people.
And what do you look for in a person of the opposite sex when you first meet? What would attract you to women?
Well, I think apart from the physical side, again, I think somebody who's pleasant, who's natural, who's relaxed, somebody who's calm, just pleasant, just sort of nice.
You're not worried if they're career orientated?
No. No. Well, as somebody who's career orientated myself, I couldn't blame them for that.
Yeah.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Now, do you admire any famous people, past or present?
Yes, I've admired a few. People like Gandhi, philosophers like Bertrand Russell, present-day people like Prince Charles, who's socially aware.
Were you surprised then that he was looking for a girlfriend?
I was. I couldn't really understand why somebody who had so much going for him was actually here with us in the dating agency. He seemed to have a successful business. I knew that he was divorced, so I presumed that, you know, he was looking for a new partner since he'd been divorced. But He had a lot of qualities and he seemed to have a very lively personality, and I thought that he would have no difficulty meeting somebody.
And what do you feel about it now, knowing who you were sitting opposite?
Well, obviously with hindsight, you look back on it and it changes the whole situation. And it's made me very aware of how misleading good looks can be, and how really you can't always trust people on face value.
Cannan's performance did the trick, though. The agency was inundated with women taken in by the smooth, educated businessman. We showed the dating agency video to a consultant therapist, and he took a completely different view, seeing right through the facade.
For the majority of people, when they hear about a sex offender, they immediately go into a typology, you know, that somehow he's like a man in a dirty raincoat, the comical joke at one end, or else he's a 6'6" monster looking a bit like a werewolf. Cannan dramatically opposes those types of stereotypes because he was a man who was quite able to form relationships with women. There's talk of numerous relationships he had, some extremely abusive, but he had the ability to form that relationship.
You saw the dating agency video.
Yes.
Did it surprise you that here was a man who was a flamboyant man, a suave man, and yet underneath there must have been something bubbling away?
It didn't surprise me at all, but then I'd worked with men very similar to Cannan within prison who'd done very similar things. So I've always known that it can be that type of man who actually does those sorts of things. And I think in investigation we always have to be careful in case we have a stereotype of what a man is that does this sort of thing, because we can be deceived by it. When you consider that whole video is a charade as far as he's concerned, because he's just been released from prison for rape, he's actually the whole video pretending to be something that he's not, and how plausible he is in many ways as he comes over in that video shows you how he must have operated with regard to abducting and raping women. You have a clear picture of that.
He does appear through the dating agency video to be very attractive to women. They were inundated with calls afterwards. Is this normal?
It's not uncommon, and I can't speak for women as to why they would or would not find him attractive.
Yes. So what was Cannan looking for?
Physically, somebody like Stephanie Beecham.
Who's that?
No, it's actually, she's, I think she's in Dallas, Falcon Crest or something. But no, joking apart. Somebody natural, nice, pleasant, somebody with character, little personality.
Practical?
Practical, yes. Somebody, just somebody normal. Somebody who's easy and relaxed to be with.
Now what about TV comedy programs? Is there anything that you like in that vein?
I'm a little bit dry as regards humour. Dave Allen. Benny Hill is okay. Maybe that's a bit slapstick.
Benny Hill.
That's a bit slapstick, I know, but yeah, Benny Hill's okay. Or he used to be. Not so good nowadays, but he used to be. Yeah, that type of, mainly dry humour.
In his video, he came out with some quite unusual and fairly amusing things. He seemed to have a very good imagination, and he seemed to tell you the things that you wanted to hear. He seemed to be a fun person. I mean, obviously, in a dating agency, people that are fun and lively and outgoing meet more people, and they're more attractive to the opposite sex. So he seemed to know exactly what was required.
Do you think there was any suggestion that you were going to be one of his victims?
I think now, looking back with hindsight, it's probably very likely that I would have been. It's lucky that my husband was in the office and that I wasn't actually there alone, because I think if I'd been there alone with him, things might have been very different.
3 weeks later, Cannan found his victim, Shirley Banks. He brought her back here to his flat. The police could only piece together what must have happened, how she was handcuffed and gagged, forced at gunpoint, kept here for 18 hours, then driven in Cannan's black BMW to Lonely Woods on the Quantocks, where she was killed. As far as the police in Bristol were concerned, she completely disappeared, along with her rusty orange Mini. But the big breakthrough finally came 3 weeks after Shirley went missing. Police arrested Cannan in Leamington Spa on a completely different case. They found the tax disc from Shirley's Mini and the car itself, now painted blue and with false plates, inside his garage. There was no sign of Shirley or what had happened to her, but the police were convinced they had their man.
For Richard Banks, his family and close friends, it had been a painful 3 weeks, a period of despair, frustration and helplessness. Not only did they have to deal with their own emotions of grief and worry, but also the scrutiny of the press and the police investigations. Steve Wilson and his girlfriend Caroline Harris, who gave up work to be with Richard 24 hours a day, were so concerned with the way the police inquiry was going, they kept a day-to-day diary. Looking back, they say, there were moments of complete insensitivity.
We stressed several times that Shirley was not the sort of girl who would disappear for a day or a minute even without someone knowing where she was. They took them a long time to appreciate that. They did appreciate it after asking hundreds and hundreds of friends, and uniformly the answer was she wouldn't do that sort of thing. They were very slow to react to that.
And I presume by the time they had satisfied themselves that this was very serious, days and days, perhaps weeks had gone past.
Certainly. I mean, I don't think they decided anything until they'd actually got the car, when it was really presented to them on a plate.
In the first couple of weeks, there were several incidents that you found particularly frustrating and showed signs, if you like, of police incompetence. Can you remember those clearly?
Perhaps the smallest, but perhaps the most symptomatic of the whole thing was a policeman knocking on Richard's door with a picture of Shirley saying, "Have you seen this woman?" Extraordinary that should happen.
There's a list of other incidents, but above all, there seemed little police liaison with Richard or help from other sources.
It's difficult to imagine what he was really going through. Even now it's difficult to imagine what he's going through, but hell, I should think, would be one word to describe it.
Well, I think I'd be a bit presumptuous to say that I did cope, really, and I think it's probably, as you well know, the sort of support of friends and family, either from the wings or sort of directly, that have enabled me to get through it. I would think it would be stretching it to say that I did cope, really, for a lot of it.
From the outset, Richard Banks was among the main suspects. He bears no resentment about that, but the question mark remains. Could anything else have been done that might have saved Shirley's life? Their friends believe the police were too slow to see the connection with the attack on Julia Holman.
It seems appalling to me that the police seem to have no record that John Cannan actually lived in Bristol. He's a man who, as we now know, had served time in prison for particularly hideous rapes, etc., and that they didn't seem to know he was living in Bristol. Julia Holman in Cannon's Marsh gave a very accurate description of that man. In an ideal world, they would have built up a photo fit, they would have matched it with people that they had on record who living in Bristol who'd committed similar sort of crimes, and they perhaps would have found him earlier.
And what about Richard Banks? In court, he was pictured as a man enjoying a wealthy lifestyle, driving a Porsche, and fully recovered from his wife's murder. The truth is very different. He has a new life now and a new girlfriend, but he's lost everything. His house, job, car, and tens of thousands of pounds. The mental scars will stay with him forever.
I don't think about what he did to Shirley, because I cannot think about it.
Do you still have memories of her then?
It's very difficult to say. I mean, no, really, because I think, you know, that is a psychological reaction tends to be that if you start blacking out bits of the past, you tend to, well, it's easier probably to black the lot out. And yeah, I have very happy memories which occasionally come flickering back in a very nice way, but I'm afraid any sort of lasting good memories go alongside any thoughts about John Cannan, because that's the only way I can keep a sort of mental balance.
Do you have any thoughts on the man himself?
Not really, no. I mean, he's obviously a very pathetic, sick person.
Is a life sentence too good for him?
No, I think a life sentence is the appropriate sentence if it does mean life, which I gather, means 30 years, which I would consider to be appropriate.
That brings us on to the point that we know he's been inside before for a serious rape. Do you think there's something wrong there, that he comes out and offends again?
Well, I would say that, as with a lot of these persistent offenders, it would be inevitable that he would offend again. if that was the nature of the man, and some very serious questions must be asked.
Do you feel hatred towards him?
No, I don't, but I feel very bitter towards the system that allowed him to offend again.
What about the future? Would you say you've recovered now as mentally as much as you're going to?
I really don't know, Steve. I mean, I am plodding on and, you know, enjoying a reasonably happy life. Well, very happy life. I feel very lucky, as I did before all this happened. And really nothing has happened to me, as I've said in the past. It's not me people should feel sorry for.
Who should they feel sorry for?
Well, Shirley, obviously.
Richard Banks, another victim of John Cannan, clearly relieved that the case is now over. And there's a sense of relief too for the police team who'd been on the case. Over the last 18 months, the one man who got closest to Cannan was Chief Inspector Brian Saunders. He spent hours in interviews, and by the end the two men were on first-name terms. But were the police too slow off the mark when Shirley Banks went missing?
I think one thing about investigating a murder is that you do get to know the people involved very, very well. And in the early stages, you've got to check people out. That can be misunderstood. I'd like to think at this stage, in fact, I'm confident at this stage, every person who was checked out, they are aware of the reasons and the necessities of it. And in fact, it did pay dividends at the trial. And I think that's the reason we did it.
Tonight, as police close their files on the Shirley Banks murder case, there's widespread speculation that Cannan may have got off lightly. If not, then that he's got away with the murder of the missing estate agent Susie Lamplugh. Policemen involved with that inquiry came to Bristol to question him. They'd noticed some remarkable coincidences. That Cannan had come out of prison on July the 25th, 1986, 3 days before Susie Lamplugh vanished. Then there was the mysterious Mr. Kipper, the prospective house buyer seen with Susie that day. He had a black BMW like Cannan. He was described as tall, clean-cut, good-looking. He was seen waiting, armed with champagne, a favourite technique of John Cannan. Perhaps the most intriguing point of all, when John Cannan tried to disguise Shirley Banks's Mini, he could have picked any number plate he liked. Detectives working on the Susie Lamplugh case wondered why he chose the letters SLP. At Exeter today, the officer heading the Shirley Banks inquiry played down the links between the two cases.
Throughout this investigation, lots and lots of people have asked me about Susie Lamplugh. Well, you know that the Metropolitan Police have looked into the missing girl, Susie Lamplugh. They, in fact, interviewed Cannan about it, and I know that they've spoken to you about it. My understanding is there is no evidence to connect him at the moment, and I think there the matter must rest.
And as speculation grew, Cannan's solicitor took the unusual step of issuing this statement.
I've been asked of any connection between Mr. Cannan and a Miss Lamplugh. We're all aware of the speculation there has been in the recent past. So far as my client is concerned, his instructions are that he has never met the lady. What the police position may be, I cannot say. It has never been suggested to me that any charges are likely. The only information I have is based on a press report when the Metropolitan Police confirmed that as far as they were concerned, there was no evidential link whatsoever between Mr. Cannan and Miss Lamplugh.
Scotland Yard have confirmed tonight that they will be questioning Cannan about the Susie Lamplugh case. He's always denied ever meeting her. It's worth remembering that he'd always denied meeting Shirley Banks too. One man who studied both cases is Ray Wire, the consultant from Birmingham.
There's lots of circumstantial evidence, there's lots of speculation that a person who could do what Cannan did to women and to Shirley Banks, and the way he disposed of Shirley Banks was therefore could he have done the same thing to Susie Lamplugh. And of course I would have to come out and say that there's a high probability that he could have done that. Again, we're dealing with a man who was able to function in a way that was aware of how crimes are investigated, and he, as all sadistic killers, learn by their mistakes.
Now, do you have any ambitions in the future, or do you feel that you've achieved your ambitions already?
I've achieved them.
Right.
Basically, financially I've achieved them.
So you're going to cut and keel over, are you?
No, no, not at all. I'm just looking now, I'm in a sedimentary period where financially and career-wise I've achieved what I've wanted to achieve.
Yeah.
I'm just now looking for what the next thing to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
If John Cannan hadn't been caught for the killing of Shirley Banks, would he have carried on?
Yes. I believe so. And he would have raped. And he would have done other things. And I believe the only way it was stopped was because he was caught.
Would he have devised an elaborate plan to stay one step ahead of the police?
As a serial rapist and the way he was operating, he learns from his mistakes. I believe he would have been planning these sorts of things even when he was in prison previously for rape.
John Cannan will never get the chance to rape again. Tonight he's in prison. He'll be there until he dies.